back to watching Business Morning here on Channels Television. We did tell you earlier that for 4 straight days now we've had oil prices climb, and that's connected to what's going on in the United States. The United States is trying to restock its stockpiles that it gave out at the earlier part of the war going on in Ukraine and how it affected prices. To help us understand how it will affect us here, especially since we're talking about the budget, funding of the budget is directly connected to our revenue from oil. We have Clement joining us now. Clement Igbanugo, economist with Financial Derivatives, joining us virtually from Victoria Island. Good morning, Mr. Igbanugo. Thank you so much for your time this morning. It doesn't look like we can run away from this oil conversation so much, especially when we're talking about our budget, because that's is how we are going to fund it. And then we're talking about debt restructuring, we're talking about debt to revenue ratio and all.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Ini, and very good morning. Our budget is benchmarked on oil revenue. And so it's an oil-dependent economy in terms of revenue generation, in terms of export, in terms of foreign exchange. When you look at the GDP, the contribution to GDP, you may say, oil may not be contributing so massively, but in terms of revenue and export, it's all dependent on oil. So whatever that happens to oil price in the global market will affect us. It's a good thing that oil price has been rallying as a result of a combination of factors. One is the confidence, the optimism with China, given the fact that the indication is showing that it will still remain committed to opening up its economy. And if there are no obstacles to that policy trust, it means that there's going to be more demand for oil. And also what we are seeing in the US, of course, you also do know that if US stock is false, as we've seen in the past few days, it means that the oil market is bullish. There's a higher demand for oil, and that is actually upticking the price. And for Nigeria, thank God, the last oil production statistics we have is showing that Nigeria oil production is rising now to about 1.16 million barrels per day. That is good for revenue. That is good for foreign exchange if we can actually plug into all of this. So we expect that oil production will increase much more with the intervention that government is putting on ground. And with this, we expect that there will be increase in foreign exchange. Remember that the CBN of late has actually been intervening much more than it did in the first half of the year in the forex market. So there is need for much more forex in order to ensure that exchange rates remain relatively stable. Over a week now, exchange rate has been hovering between 743 to 749. And I think if it continues this way, that will be much better than what we had at the beginning of the year. So it's good news for Nigeria.
Yeah, good thing for Nigeria, but we can hardly say the same thing for Ghana. We know that it seems Ghana has been bitten by something that is supposed to be a blessing. As some people ask the question, has oil become shown itself as a blessing or a curse to Ghana? We see that the growth has slowed to 2.9%. And it seems the history of this started from the discovery of oil. So many loans, too many aids, too many financial commitments because of the anticipation of oil windfall.
Yeah, sure. Ghana became an oil exporting country, I think 2010, with about 60,000 barrels per day. Today, Ghana is already around 185, 200,000 barrels a day. But then, like you said, Ghana had his own share of the trouble when he started taking a cheap loans. In 2012, that's 10 years ago, Ghana loan debt was around $19 billion. Today, Ghana's debt is about $55 billion. That means Ghana has been able to move from about 47% of GDP as its debt to now close to 80% of the GDP. And remember that when interest, since after the financial meltdown of 2007, 2008, global interest rate has been low, and a lot of developing economies took advantage to shore up their debt, external debt, the borrowing to spend on infrastructure and stuff like that. But then the thing is, one thing is to borrow, but another thing is to ensure that it's well invested so that you'll be able to pay itself back. So Ghana entered debt overhang. What economists call a debt overhang is a situation whereby you build up your debt to a point where you cannot borrow further. So before we enter 2022, several rating agencies have started downgrading Ghana, and investors began to run out of Ghana. As we speak, Ghana has negative net capital flow of about $1.28 billion. And what does that mean? That puts pressure on the exchange rate. And that's why you saw Ghana exchange rate crash from about 6 cedis to $1 to 14.5 cedis to $1 before, after the IMF staff level agreement, its sentiment improved, and then it appreciated down to about 9 cedis per dollar. So, but the problem we're having in Ghana is good we take note of this, because it's similar to what we're having in Nigeria. Remember that since fourth quarter of 2020, Ghana began recovering. This is the least growth it posted. 2.9 is the least it had posted. And very significant is the fact that the manufacturing sector contracted by 7%. Similar to what happened in Nigeria. The Q3 report of manufacturing sector contracted by 1.9%. Why? Because of that currency crisis, because the manufacturing sector is very much tied to forex exposure. And once you are having a high exchange rate volatility, it's going to affect the manufacturing sector. And then we also have high inflation affecting sales and profit margin and all of that. So we discovered that one of the worst hits would be the manufacturing sector. The problem now is the debt sustainability. Ghana has no other way than to go to IMF, which has done. Nigeria is already climbing. Don't forget that in 2012, we were at 7.6 trillion naira debt. Today we are at 44. That's more than a 498% increase in debt. And Ghana is using 54% of its revenue to service its debt. We are using over 100% of our revenue to service our debt. So we're already climbing that ladder of Ghana. And except we do something very drastic in the near to medium term, we may find ourselves in the trajectory of Ghana.
Yeah, well, exactly. That's why we're having this conversation this morning. And that's why we're also talking about the issue of the supplementary budget, which obviously is going to increase our borrowings and increase our debt servicing. But help us drive this home just briefly, because we're already out of time. How will this, or let's say in Ghana's scenario now, how is it affecting individuals' daily living, daily spending? If it happens in Nigeria, how can it affect Nigerians as individuals?
Thank you so much. When you have debt crisis, it's a very big drawback for the economy. First of all, is that government will be struggling to service its debt, or struggling to restructure and all of that. And then that shifts attention from spending on critical infrastructure, critical sectors. And that will, in the first instance, lead to reduction in government spending, which will also reduce the multiplier effect of fiscal expenditure on the economy. So you are going to have an output effect. Then on individuals, you are going to have decline. For example, let's look at what is happening currently. Part of what is driving our inflation is fiscal debt monetization. When the president went to the National Assembly to ask for supplementary budget, and in addition to it is the additional borrowing from central bank, which is a quick borrowing, taking the ways and means to about 24 trillion naira. What does that mean for us? That's higher inflation, because that's adding to monetary base, and that is squeezing household income. All right. One of the things that Ghana has done in an attempt to restructure their debt is to suspend payment of coupon. In fact, the entire 2023 is 0% payment on coupon. That is a reduction in earning of those who invested in those instruments. And so the loss of confidence in the economy itself, driving investors out of the economy, is one thing that will drag the economy down. So there are a whole lot of consequences for the economy, for individuals, for firms. But don't forget that why Nigerian case is even more serious than Ghana is that while Ghana was borrowing in the past 10 years, it moved its economy from $41 billion economy to $78 billion economy. Nigeria borrowed by more than 478% in 10 years, and the economy slumped from $445 billion now to $441 billion. So you see that we really need to be circumspective in terms of addressing the debt issue.
Yeah, it looks like we really need to. Mr. Clement Igbanugo, economist with Derivatives Company, thank you so much for your time this morning.